पृथिवी शान्तिरन्तरिक्षगं शान्तिर् द्यौ शान्तिर् दिशः शान्तिरवान्तर दिशा शान्तिरग्निः शान्तिर्वायुः शान्तिरादित्यः शान्तिश्चन्द्रमा शान्तिर्नक्षत्राणि शान्तिरापः शान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिर्वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्गौ शान्तिरजा शान्तिरश्वः शान्तिः पुरुषः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिर्ब्राह्मणः शान्तिः शान्तिरेव शान्तिः शान्तिर्मे अस्तु शान्तिः. May there be peace on earth and in the sky. May there be peace in the water and in all directions. May there be peace in the plants, in the trees, and in animals. May there be peace in the hearts of all beings. May there be peace in everyone and in everything. Sarvetra sukhinas santu. Sarve santu niramayaha. Sarve bhadrani pashyantu. Ma kaschit dukkha bhag bhavet. Sarvastaratu durgani. Sarvo bhadrani pashyatu. Sarvas sadbuddhimapnotu. Sarvas sarvatra nandatu. May all be happy and healthy. May all see what is good, and may no one experience misery. May all overcome their obstacles and acquire good tendencies. May people everywhere find joy and fulfillment. Let us now spend some time touching the center of peace and joy in our hearts. A good way to begin the practice is to withdraw the scattered energies of the mind and bring them to rest on one point. That point can be our own breathing. Let us therefore practice breathing with awareness. As we breathe in, let us visualize that our body and mind are being filled with love, strength, and compassion. And as we breathe out, let us release all the stress, anxiety, and exhaustion in the body and mind. Let us practice this way for a while. Let us now turn our attention to the region of our heart. Although God is present everywhere and in everyone, the divine presence can be felt most clearly in our own hearts. We can meditate in any way we have been taught. To remain focused, we can take the help of a short mental prayer or a mantra or a divine name. Let us now spend some time dwelling on the presence of God in our hearts. Om Asato ma Satkamaya Tamaso ma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravir Maheti Rudrayatte Takshinam Mukham Te Namam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. We shall continue with our study of Krishna's definition of jnana. And we saw in effect what is being done in this section of the 13th chapter of the Gita is Krishna is describing practices or the qualities that we need to cultivate in order for us to acquire that knowledge, the knowledge of God. And the word God, as we have seen, can be sometimes seen in an objective sense, God as the divine figure, or in a subjective way, the divine dwelling within my heart, the divine who is not distinct from my own identity. Whichever way we understand that Supreme Being to be, none of these two ways is right or wrong. They are just ways of understanding the divine. God is beyond the reach of the mind and the senses. So whichever way we try to understand God, with form, without form, with qualities, without qualities, in this specific form or that specific form, all these are our attempts to try to understand the divine with the limited instruments that are available to us. And although none of these ways of understanding God are perfect, God understands that we are trying to reach God. It's a little bit like when little babies, even before they have been able to formulate correctly the way to address their parents, they may not be even ready then to say mommy or daddy or mom or dad. A baby who is a few weeks old or few days old. But at some point, whatever efforts the baby makes, the mother understands perfectly that the baby is calling her. The father understands perfectly that the baby wants. Even though whatever the baby says may not be accurate, may not be grammatically correct, but the parents understand. Exactly in the same way, all of our efforts to pray, to understand, to meditate, to think of God, none of these are perfect. There's a lot of inaccuracy there. But so long as we are sincere, so long as we know who we are calling, even though the expression itself may not be perfect or accurate, so long as inside we know, God understands. So knowledge of God really means establishing that connection with the divine. And it's through the imperfect attempts that we make, because of the imperfect instruments that we have, once we acquire that purity of heart, that clarity of the mind, that sincerity of the heart, it's then that we transcend the limitations of those senses. The limitations of the mind, the limitations of the senses are left behind, and then we go into this limitless divine realm and have direct access to that knowledge. Well, this morning there is this a big space flight is getting ready, and many people are seeing it live. Again, these are just human mind, human efforts to go beyond the force of gravity as we understand it, and at least reach as far as we can from this world that we are, and try to touch the outer edges of space, if you like. So just as these kind of efforts can be done externally, these efforts can be done internally as well. And challenging as this external exploration is, even 1,000 times more challenging is the internal exploration that every spiritual seeker discovers sooner or later. So let's continue. Verse number 10. Mai chananya yogena bhaktiravyabhicharini vivikta desha sevitvam aratir jana samsadi. Unswerving devotion to me by the yoga of non-separation, resort to sequestered places, distaste for the society of people. So 3 qualities that are instrumental in giving us the knowledge of God. So first, Mai ananya yogena avyabhicharini bhaktihi. So to me, we have seen this several times before. Whenever Krishna uses the first person pronoun me, it's not the historical Krishna, not the Krishna who is a son of Devaki and Vasudeva. So Krishna here is not referring to that body and mind of that historical Krishna. Krishna is referring, when he says I or me, he's referring to that infinite spirit dwelling within Krishna's body. And that's the difference between an enlightened being and those who are unenlightened. When Krishna says I, he's referring to the Atman. When you and I say I, we usually are referring to this body-mind complex. So that's the difference. Both. We all use the pronoun I. We just have to figure out who is this I referring to. So when Krishna says devotion to me, means that devotion to that infinite spirit. But how should that devotion be? Ananya Yoga. Ananya Yoga means, Anya means other. Anya. An is the prefix. So Anya means not the other. No other. So when we pray, when we meditate, when we think of God, at that moment of praying and meditating, if I do it with this firm conviction, this firm confidence that there is nothing, there is no one higher, there is no one existing apart from the divine who I am praying to. Because you see, all distractions occur when we know that there are several things occurring, right? When I'm trying to think of something and I'm getting distracted by, let's say, the baseball game that's going on. So at some corner of my consciousness, the existence of other things like games or politics or friends or family, they all exist in the field of consciousness along with God to whom I am praying. Now, Ananya means when I am praying, when I am meditating, in my field of consciousness, there should be only God and no one else. No other. Ananya. No other one should be present. So that's important. So a devotion in which there is no other being, no other entity present other than God. Now, clearly, in the course of the day, there are hundreds and thousands of people and things we interact with. But at the very least, when I am praying, when I am meditating, is it possible for me to withdraw my mind from all of these entities and just focus it on God? And at that moment, to not acknowledge the presence of anything or anyone other than God. An avyabhicharini, unswerving. Vyabhichara means that I'm trying to concentrate my mind here, but I'm getting distracted by this, getting distracted by that. So, avyabhichara means completely focused without any distraction. So, Ananya Yoga and avyabhichara, there is not too much difference between the two. But the two are mentioned here to emphasize the idea that when I pray, when I meditate, God alone should be the focus of my attention. At that moment, I should tell myself, nothing in life is more important. Absolutely nothing is more important at this moment than the sound of my mantra or the form of my Ishta, of my chosen deity. Eventually, when I get established during the times of my prayer and during the times of my meditation in this one pointed focus on the divine, then slowly this kind of a focus will percolate, will remain at the background even during the times when I am not praying, when I am not meditating. I will still be able to interact with the world. I will still be able to carry out all my duties and responsibilities. But deep down, in the corner of my heart, I will know God alone exists. That is how it is. Think about this way, that you go to watch a movie and you have taken some popcorn with you and you love popcorn and you are munching at your popcorns, enjoying them while you are enjoying the movie as well. Now, you know this popcorn is very real because you are really tasting it and you're enjoying it. But that doesn't stop you, doesn't prevent you from enjoying the movie that you're seeing. You know that all the pictures that are being projected on the screen, none of that is very real. If you see a battle occurring on the screen, you know that there is really no battle occurring. There is just a screen there. But you can enjoy that while enjoying the more real popcorn in your hand. I mention this because sometimes it's easy to imagine, oh, if I just think God alone is real, then everything, all this will disappear. No, it won't disappear. It will remain. But it won't be as real as God. God will be your popcorn, and this whole world will be this big 3D cosmic movie. You can enjoy the movie as long as you want. No one is forcing you to watch the movie either. So once you're tired, it's like, okay, this movie is getting too repetitive. You can just walk out and say, okay, enough of it. And that is what moksha really means. So as long as you are aware of the reality of God, while also seeing the world, that's how enlightened being, the Jivan Muktas, do. They are fully established in the reality of God. They know God alone exists, but they are also seeing this movie without getting affected by it. When they get bored, when they say, okay, enough, then they just walk out. At present, our situation is a little bit different. At present, we have the popcorn in hand, but the movie is very interesting, very fascinating, so absorbing, well-directed movie. It's so true to life, and we have got so absorbed into that movie that we have forgotten this popcorn in hand. And so this reality of the popcorn in hand is forgotten because that which is happening on the screen has become more real to us. So that is one way we can try to understand the difference between what we see and what the enlightened beings see. So unswerving devotion to me by the yoga of non-separation. Now the Ananya Yoga, non-separation, can also be understood in another way. And that is, what is the nature of my relationship with God? And as we have seen sometimes, that oftentimes our spiritual journey can begin with looking upon God as a being who is different from me. I may be curious about God. I may want to develop a connection with God. Some of us might feel an innate connection already. We may love God without ever having met God. But this is just how the spiritual life often begins for most of us. But over time, either through our curiosity, our love, our need, our hope, somehow a bond gets established. A relationship is formed. We know how relationships are formed in the world. It's not always a very calculated move. Sometimes relationships just happen. Similarly with our connection with God also. It's not always a very well-charted, calculated move. But a relationship does get established. What is the nature of that relationship? There is no one fixed way that that relationship can be defined. And the various ways people can relate with God is described in books. Some may see God as a friend. Some may see God as a master. But I'm a servant. I'm a loyal servant or attendant on the divine, and God is my master. Or God is a friend. Or God is my father. God is my mother. God is my beloved. There are any number of ways we can connect with God. Or God is my child. I can be the father, I can be the mother, and God can be my baby. There is no limit to how many ways we can try to relate ourselves to God. In philosophical terms, people sometimes connect with God as, well, God is the infinite being, and I'm this small little particle. So I'm a part of the infinitude of God. God is the whole, I'm a part. And then a stage is reached, according to some seekers of God, when that distinction between God and me is completely eliminated. When love becomes so strong, so intense, that God is a separate being and I am a separate being, that idea goes away. That is where this yoga of non-separation is, Ananya Yoga. We read in Krishna's life that when he was dancing with the gopis, at first every gopi was aware that she is dancing with Krishna. Krishna was such a beloved figure, and the gopi was dancing with him. But once their whole being got absorbed in Krishna, they saw no other person other than Krishna. They even forgot themselves. When they forgot themselves, then Krishna alone remained. That is Ananya Yoga. That the non-separation from God can occur by me, who is at present separated from God. This little me, this I, disappears. So that is Ananya Yoga. We will see that sometimes when we are praying, when we are meditating, for some time we are aware of the fact when we are praying, when we are meditating, we are aware of the fact that I am now praying, that I am now meditating. But if and when that prayer, that meditation becomes intense, when my mind gets fully focused, it's total concentration, then even the idea, I am praying, I am meditating, that idea disappears. Then in my field of consciousness, it's not I and God connected with the act of prayer, or I and God connected with the act of meditation. It's just God. That is the ideal we want to reach in our spiritual practice. Right now, for many of us, we start with the idea, now this is prayer time, this is meditation time. I'm praying to God, I'm meditating on God. But it's not just I am praying to God, there are these others. What happened at my workplace? There are these other things I need to attend to. This is the deadline I want to reach, and so on. So there are so many other distracting factors that it's not just me and God. Along with God and me, there are 100 other things in my field of view. And therefore, it's so easy to get distracted. So the first thing to do is to remove all these other distractions. When all other distractions are removed, only God and me remain. And at that stage, even this me is a distraction. So I want to be only focused on God. When this me disappears, then that becomes Ananya Yoga. Non-separateness. There is nobody else to separate from. God alone remains. So, Maicha Ananya Yogena Bhaktihi Avyabhicharini. Next, Krishna says, Vivikta Desha Sevitvam, resorting to sequestered places. Sequestered means places which are quiet, places which are not crowded. Now, this is something that we all have noticed, that it's difficult to pray and meditate and to do any kind of concentrated activity when there is a lot of sound, there are a lot of people around. Which is why when we try to pray and meditate, we find a quiet spot. It does make a big difference. But sometimes being in a quiet spot itself is not enough, because even if there may not be any external sound, there is all this noise going on inside our heads. Even though there may not be people outside talking while we are trying to meditate, there is so much of chattering going on inside my mind. Even though there may not be any external conversation going on, there may be a lot of internal conversation going on within. So, from external distractions, we become aware of internal distractions. And relatively speaking, external distractions are somewhat easier to get rid of. Somewhat. But what do we do with these internal distractions? We need the mind. We need the mind to practice meditation. But the mind is also the cause of distraction. So we cannot say, well, let me get rid of the mind. We cannot, even if we want to. But it's just not possible. So we need the instrumentality of the mind, but we need a mind which is quiet, which is concentrated. And that's how we find these two apparently contradictory statements in the Upanishads. One is, na vag gacchati no manaha, tatra no vag gacchati. The senses don't go there. The mind cannot reach there. There is also this phrase, avang manasa gocharam, that ultimate reality is beyond the reach of the senses and the mind. So the mind seems to be an ineffective instrument to take us to that infinite reality. The problem is that we don't have any instrument other than the body and mind. So there are these two instruments that we have, the body and the mind. Neither of them is perfect. We can try to discipline both of them as much as it is possible. Now, disciplining the body would mean what Krishna says elsewhere in the Gita about practicing moderation in food, rest, work, and so on. So, a body which is disciplined by moderation will be able to cooperate with us when we want to meditate. Now, oftentimes, when we sit for meditation, we are asked to sit in a comfortable posture with your spinal column straight and without any movement. But we know that many people find that very difficult. Well, you may be able to sit still for a minute or two. After some time, the body wants to kind of adjust a little bit. If you're trying to sit cross-legged, then you don't have to sit cross-legged really. But if you want to sit that way, then sometimes the feet get numb or the knees start paining. So the body can be a distraction. So if I can discipline my body well, then the body will try to get out of the way as much as it is possible. Similarly, I need to discipline my mind too, so that I get the benefit of the mind, but not the distractions of the mind. Therefore, there is this other quote from the Upanishad which says that manasaivedam aptavyam, manasa eva idam aptavyam. This ultimate truth can be reached only by the help of the mind. So these are the two contradictory statements, as I said. First it said the mind cannot reach there, and then we are told only with the help of the mind you can go there. And so Sri Shankaracharya in his commentary resolves this apparent discrepancy by pointing out that su samskrutena manasa, only when the mind which is well disciplined, the mind which is purified, that's the word he used, purified or refined. Now, a purification of the mind or refinement of the mind really means disciplining of the mind, getting the mind under control. A mind which is under our control, a mind which is disciplined, becomes a good instrument, helpful in revealing that divine reality. So, when we go to a quiet spot, we have to eliminate external distractions and try to eliminate internal distractions by refining and disciplining one's own mind, acquiring control over one's mind. With that, knowledge becomes easy to acquire. So hence the need to go to solitary places. Sri Ramakrishna used to say in Bengali, there's a beautiful alliteration. It just sounds like Mone, Bone, Kone. That's how it sounds in Bengali. And what Sri Ramakrishna says is, try to spend some time regularly, either inside your mind, that is shutting out the external world, or if there is a quiet spot near your home, in a wooded area or somewhere, where you'll be away from all these distractions. You see, sometimes, even in a wooded area, you might hear the chirping of birds, the wind blowing. Now these are, these are distractions, but these are not as terrible distractions as the sound of people talking or some loud music being played. Music also can be wonderful, but some music not particularly helpful in a meditative practice. All those can be distractions. But sometimes you could be sitting in a wooded area, there might be birds chirping, there might be the sound of flowing water, maybe there is a stream nearby. Oftentimes those don't prove to be distractions. In any case, we either find some quiet spot in our own heart, or we find a quiet spot in a wooded area nearby, or if neither of these is possible, then at the very least, find some quiet corner in your own home and try to spend some time there every day. That is what Sri Ramakrishna recommended. And as I have pointed out many times, the advantage of going to a quiet spot, of eliminating all distractions, is that that's really the only time we get to know our own selves. Even before we get to know God, even if someone goes to a quiet spot away from all distractions and does not try to think of God at all, but just there quietly, then the only person available to you is yourself. And that would be a productive time also, even if you're not meditating, even if you're not praying, just be by yourself. And you might be surprised by whom you meet there. Because you're just meeting yourself. And lot of us think that we know ourselves. Maybe not. Maybe we know just a little bit of ourselves. There is a lot we can know of ourselves if all the distractions go away and we are just by ourselves. Again, when I say all distractions, I've only referred to being away from people, but it includes being away from your cell phone too, your smartphone. Switch it off. Switch off your computer. Switch off your television set. And then just be. And see how you feel. And of course, you've heard me say this many times, but if you get bored doing this, it brings us to a rather disturbing conclusion that I'm just in my own company, there is nothing to distract me, and I'm bored to death, which really means my own company is very boring. I can't bear my own company. Then we should not be too surprised if other people get bored by our company too. So if we want other people to enjoy our company, we have to first go to a quiet spot and find out whether we are able to enjoy our own company. Because if I'm able to enjoy my own company, then there is a good chance that other people will enjoy my company too. So that is what is meant by saying going to a quiet spot. Because that's the best opportunity we have to know ourselves and to also know God. And finally, aratihi janasamsadi, distaste for the society of people. Now, this really seems like you just have to hate all people, just hate everybody else and just be by yourself. Now, that's not the intended meaning here, obviously. So, Sri Shankaracharya in his commentary points out that aratihi, distaste or not particularly enjoying the company of people who distract you from your ideal in life, from your goal in life. Because being in the company of people who share your ideals, being in the company of people, for instance, if you are interested in spiritual life, and there are other fellow devotees, other friends who are also interested in spiritual life, then being in their company can be very beneficial because the topics of your conversation can bring up ideas. You have an opportunity to share your ideas. You have an opportunity to listen to what they have to say. So that can be an extremely productive meeting with people. So the idea here is not that you have to avoid the company of people altogether, but avoid the company of people who do not, who may not be helpful in your own spiritual journey, because there are already enough distractions around. And if we can at least try to minimize these distractions by searching, by choosing to be in a company that is more congenial to the ideals and ideas that we cherish and the ideas that we love. So let me read that verse once again. Maicha ananya yogena bhaktiravyabhicharini vivikta desha sevitvam aratir janasamsadi. Unswerving devotion to me by the yoga of non-separation, resort to sequestered places, distaste for the society of people. Next verse, 11. Adhyatma jnana nityatvam tatvajnanartha darshanam etadjnanam iti proktam ajnanam yadatonyatha. Constant application to spiritual knowledge, understanding of the end of true knowledge, this is declared to be knowledge, and what is opposed to it is ignorance. So it is at this verse that finally Krishna is concluding his description of knowledge. So this began, as you can see, from verse number 7. So 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. These 5 verses contain this description of knowledge. So 2 more qualities are mentioned here. Adhyatma jnana nityatvam. Adhyatma means that which is related to the self, related to the Atman. So Adhyatma jnana, so the knowledge of the self. Nityatvam, constantly applying oneself to the knowledge of the self. Now, we may say, how does this fit in here? Because we have talked about God up to this point. So, what about this knowledge of the self? Whenever we speak about God and our relationship with God, there is self involved there. How is this self connected with the divine being? What is the nature of that relationship? So understanding the nature of the relationship of the self with the divine and to be applying it constantly, that is very important. What this also means is cultivating a habit of study in which the self is always present. By which I mean applying the insights that we get in any study to one's own self. Making every study very personal. If we don't make the study personal, then what we study, what we know, will remain in some part of our head without it influencing our life at all, without it changing us in any way. So it's not enough to simply read books. Reading books can be helpful, but there are 2 things that can happen, at least 2 things that can happen. If I read books, the book will give me a lot of ideas. And if I'm able to process those ideas well, it will produce some knowledge in me. And it will give me some amount of intellectual clarity, intellectual understanding. And there is some benefit there. But that benefit is still very limited. It may not change me as a person. So I have this intellectual clarity. I'm able to appreciate the truth of something. I'm able to share my ideas with others. I may be able to discuss the topic very eloquently. I may be able to impress other people with my knowledge and my scholarship. I may be able to participate in arguments and even defeat other people's point of view. All of this is possible, but it still may not change me as a person. That is what I mean by saying that the knowledge or the study must become personal. By personal, again, what I mean is that whatever I study, whatever makes sense to me, I don't have to accept anything blindly. But if it resonates with my head and heart, then making it personal means applying it to my own specific life situation. Every one of us is unique. No 2 people in the world have identical life situation. And therefore, although these general principles of spiritual life are common, unless we make the study personal, unless I apply it to my own specific case, it will not change me. So let's say if I read something in the Gita and I feel, yeah, this is right, this makes sense, then I shouldn't stop there by simply saying, oh, it makes sense. Well, if it makes sense, if it rings true in my heart, then I have to say, well, if it is true, how do I practice it? How does it become relevant to me at present, in my present circumstances? Is there a way I can put it into practice? Either in terms of doing something or in terms of thinking in a particular way. Now, it's not necessary that everything that we read should become practicable immediately. Maybe not. Maybe something is not very relevant right now, which is okay. Everything doesn't have to be relevant right now. But that which is relevant, that which I can apply to myself, I must find then practical ways of putting it into practice. So when I wake up tomorrow morning, how does this teaching become real in my life? Now, if something is not relevant today, doesn't mean it's totally irrelevant. We know that our own specific life situation changes. It changes with age, it changes with circumstances, it changes with many other factors. So that which is not relevant to me now could be relevant to me after 5 years or 10 years. So my studying it carefully now could be helpful to me 5 years from now. And I might suddenly remember, oh yes, I had read this 5 years ago and now it makes sense to me. Now I know what I should do about it. So study has to be made very personal. Study is adhyaya. When it becomes personal, then it becomes swadhyaya. That is a Sanskrit word. That is adhyatma jnana nityatvam, making it and not doing this study very sporadically, nityatvam, doing it constantly. And tattva jnanartha darshanam, understanding of the end of true knowledge. Now, seeking knowledge, before we seek anything, before we go to attain something, we must be very clear about why I want it. It's not that everyone says, get the knowledge of the self or get to know God. No, I don't have to do it because everyone is telling me to do it. I need to ask myself, why? Why do I want to do it? What will it give me? What it promises to give me, is it a goal worth investing my time and energy into? So when I'm convinced that this is a goal worth striving after, then I will not need any external incentive to do it because I'm convinced that this is something good for me. If it is something good for me, I will do it on my own. But I need to think. Now others, our parents, our teachers and books will try to provide us with the ideas. But ultimately, it's we who have to make the decision. And because it is we who make the decision, we are responsible for what we choose. If we make a wrong decision and then suffer for it, we cannot blame anybody. We cannot blame our parents, we cannot blame our teachers, we cannot blame our books. We have to blame ourselves because I made the wrong choice. So we have to take responsibility. And that is why we must know what the purpose of this quest is, what the purpose of knowledge is. So with this, we come to the end of Krishna's description of what knowledge is, or what will lead us to knowledge. So take a look at these verses from 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. And what Krishna concludes by saying is, Ajnanam yadato anyatha. Other than this, everything opposed to this, everything contrary to the qualities mentioned, that is nothing but ignorance. In other words, that will keep me immersed in ignorance. So I'm already in ignorance. These are the ways I can get out of that ignorance and attain knowledge. If I don't make any effort to do so, I will remain immersed in ignorance. While ignorance is bliss, is up to a point, because very soon the pain and suffering inherent in a life of ignorance will become clear to us, and the more we delay the process, the more difficult it becomes. So the sooner we start the quest for knowledge, the better off we are. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu. So we'll have a 5-minute break now, and then if you have any questions, ideas, comments, we'll meet and discuss them later. Okay, let's look at the questions. Along with loving God, is it possible to find that oneness with God through loving someone else deeply, not attached to the body of that person? Example, loving our family and friends, but attempting to not just love who they are today as people, but loving them no matter where they go, since the body is not eternal. Best way is to see that everyone and everything that we see in the world is just a manifestation of the divine. So not that, oh, I'm loving God and I'm loving these people as well. It is possible to do that, but why not make God a part of every relationship? By that I mean, one way of doing that is to see that every person in my life is God's gift to me, or someone who belongs to God, but God has given them in my care to take care of them. So when I love someone, I'm doing it because I love God, because that someone belongs to God, someone is as much a child of God as I am, and therefore my act of loving everyone and everything in this world becomes an expression of my love for God. That would be a way by which all of our relationships, all of our doing, our working, our loving will never be separated from our connection with the Divine Being. the Atman is beyond the senses, isn't it possible that the Atman communicates through the medium of the mind and the senses? Not only is it possible, that's exactly what is happening right now. Right now, whatever the mind and the senses are able to do, they are able to do it because of the presence of the Atman. The only difference is the mind and the senses have become real, while the Atman, most of us are not even aware of it. Well, the truth is that the Atman is the only reality and the mind and the senses are only appearances. Next, one way to remove distractions is to avoid them. But how do we extinguish distractions that are unavoidable? Now, avoidable, how do we avoid this? Even the distractions which are avoidable, how do we avoid the avoidables? It's not as easy as it sounds, really. I mean, for instance now, if television is an distraction for me, and we might think that is avoidable, yes, it's avoidable because if I switch it off, I take it out of my room. But yes, physically the television has gone out of my room. But the memory of the programs that I have seen, or the sadness at missing the programs that I am missing, that is still here. So even though that might seem as an avoidable distraction, it is unavoidable as long as it is inside my head. So in that sense, every distraction, as long as it has found a place in my mind, it kind of becomes unavoidable unless and until my mind becomes disciplined. When my mind can then say, okay, this is here, but I'm not going to look at it, or I'm not going to acknowledge its presence. So it's not enough for something to be taken out of reach of my senses. I should find a way to train my mind in such a way that it won't look at it. You see, sometimes it's like a trained pet. Now, if you put some delicious food, something delicious that your dog loves, and of course your dog is going to be so thrilled and happy, wagging his or her tail would just come and grab and eat that food. But if you have trained that dog well, and you have trained the dog in such a way that you are not going to eat unless I give you permission to eat. Unless I say eat, you're not going to touch it. And then, even if you put that very delicious food in front, the dog will wait until you give the command to eat it. Now, mind should be like that, like a trained pet. Yes, there are all these distractions, there are all the hundreds of ideas and plans and hopes, everything is there. But my dog, my mind who is trained, I should train my mind. Yes, all these great ideas are there. But right now, just pray, just meditate. And after the prayer and meditation is over, okay, now you tell this mind the dog, okay, now go to baseball. Now do this, now do that. That way, even if those distractions are no longer physically near, but have lodged in our head, a trained mind can make them avoidable. If the mind is not trained, then everything in my head is totally unavoidable distraction. Yes. Next, what does Satchidananda as a non-doer do? What is work? Does it exist? Please educate us. Well, by definition, Satchidananda is a non-doer. Satchidananda doesn't do anything. The Atman doesn't do anything. everything that is done, every activity is done only by the body and mind. Period. No activity in the Atman, activity only in the body and mind. But this is important. The body and mind would not be able to do their activity without the presence of the Atman. So the Atman doesn't do anything. The Atman is simply present, but actually everything that is done by the body and mind. So the two are needed. The two have to be in some kind of a collusion in order for activity to occur, but the activity takes place only in the body and mind. It's a little bit like the phenomenon of photosynthesis in plants. Now, that thing occurs in the plants. Activity is occurring there, but that occurs only in the presence of sunlight. The sun is not really doing anything. The sun is just being the sun. The sun's presence makes a lot of things that occur in the biological world possible. But the activity is occurring in the biological world. The sun is just being sun. In something similar. So the activity is in the body and mind, but happens only in the presence of the Atman. Next, when we sing, can we see God in secular music? Can the same be applied when reading literature of all nations? Yes, I think whether it is music or literature, these are just external suggestions or external stimulants. What it goes and triggers in our mind is totally dependent on the quality of the mind. It's a little bit like, for instance, now if you go to a zoo, zoos actually, I don't recommend going to zoos, especially zoos if you have animals put behind cage. It's terrible. So it's not something that I encourage. But just to give an example, when you go to a zoo, and a lot of children love going to zoo because you get to see wild animals. Most of us who are living in urban areas don't get to see these wild animals unless you go to a safari in Africa or somewhere. And so you go to a zoo and then you get to see lions, tigers, and all these creatures, and people enjoy seeing them. But what happens? We might go to a zoo, just have fun, and all our ideas about animals might come, and then we come home, and then maybe the memory remains. Now, when Sri Ramakrishna went to a zoo, when he saw the lion, he immediately thought of Mother Durga, because the lion is a vahana, is a vehicle of Mother Durga. So looking at the lion, Ramakrishna's mind thought of the Divine Mother. Now, it's not necessary that everyone who looks at the lion is going to think of Mother Durga. So what we see externally and what bell it rings in the mind, it so totally depends on the mind. When Sri Ramakrishna went to the Calcutta Museum and he was shown a microscope, and he was able he saw through the microscope and he saw how these tiny creatures got so enlarged, he went into samadhi. So the distinction that we make between secular music and spiritual music, or a secular literature and spiritual literature, it has some relevance, true. But ultimately what matters is whatever literature we are exposed to, whatever music that we are exposed to, what it triggers in our head. It's possible to hear a song, a love song, and maybe the composer of that song who has written it from a love, say a man in love with a woman who is missing his beloved and is singing that song. Now, it might seem to be just a secular song, but let us imagine that when a devotee listens to that song and uses those words, that context, to think about a bhakta who is missing the divine. So even an apparently secular song can be seen by a devotee as a song that will evoke that separation from the divine, a song that becomes spiritual in the head of the devotee, although externally the context and the words could be very secular. Similarly, even in literature, even secular literature, read through a spiritual lens, can give us insight into human nature. We might be able to see, understand how the world functions, how people behave, and so on, and use those insights in our deeper understanding of the world and a deeper understanding of God. So, in this way, the sometimes arbitrary distinction we make between secular and spiritual, that can go away. Because ultimately, how we use those insights, how does my mind process it, that is what determines whether it will be helpful to me spiritually or not. Next, if I am not the doer, then who should take the responsibility for the karma that gets created? Yes, if I am not the doer, then whoever has done the karma gets the responsibility. And that's true even now. All karma is done by the body and mind. And the consequences of karma are also felt by the body and mind. Now, it's already happening this way. The problem is, I think the body and mind are me. So because I think the body and mind are me, whatever the body and mind does, I feel I am doing it. Which is also why whatever joy and sorrow the body and mind experience, I feel I am happy or I am miserable. So all that I need to know, not just intellectually, but experientially, is that I am different from my body and mind. Let the body and mind do what they want, and let them suffer. Who cares? The body can go to hell. I'm not the body. The mind can suffer. I'm not the mind. But it's not as simple as just saying I'm not the body and mind. Because, people can say anything they want. What kind of identity I have inside? If I totally am able to disidentify from the body and mind, then whoever has done karma, they are the ones who will experience the results of karma. If I have not done karma, I won't experience it. If the body and mind have done it, they will experience it. If I think I'm the body and mind, then I will experience it. It's as simple as that. Next, can you comment on how to overcome physical problems from sickness and not let them distract me in my meditation practice? Can the mind be used to control such distractions? Yes, but it all depends on training. Yes, physical suffering can be a great distraction. Mental suffering can be a distraction too. And all that we need to do is to train both body and mind. And Krishna recommends in the Gita moderation. Avoiding extremes in everything and practicing moderation. So disciplining the body and mind is the only way to eliminate distractions. There is no other way. Next, Finding secluded and quiet place at home would be easier than wooded area. Not in every home. Some people do not find very seclusion at home. Again, circumstances vary from family to family. In the early morning time, when there is more quietness around, better than day start? Well, generally yes. That's why oftentimes spiritual teachers advise that we meditate early in the morning and then late in the evening after one's major activity is done. Because if we have had a good sleep, then the mind is relatively rested. If you have had a good sleep, we could say that the mind has relatively less distractions. And so some people find the quality of their morning meditation better than their evening meditation. Because by the evening, throughout whatever things have happened in the course of the day, the mind can get tired, the mind can get distracted with lots of things, and evening meditation may not be as good as morning for some people. And for some people, it's just the opposite. So some people who are like late risers, not necessarily that they really they get out of their bed late. Maybe they wake up early, but they wake up slowly. So sometimes even after waking up, they might need some strong cup of coffee or something to get it going. So such people, the morning meditation would be kind of not that good. You're kind of half asleep, half dozing. But as the day advances, these people's energy level and concentration gets going. And so some people find that evening meditation is somehow better than morning. Again, there is no uniformity here. People are different, and different people have different experiences. Okay, that brings us to the end of today's ideas and comments and questions. So thank you for your questions, and we shall continue this study next week, next Sunday. We'll conclude with a prayer now. May the Divine Being, who is the Father in heaven of the Christians, Holy One of the Jewish faith, Allah of the Muslims, Buddha of the Buddhists, Tao of the Taoists, Ahura Mazda of the Zoroastrians, the Great Spirit of the Native Americans, and Brahman of the Hindus, lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May we be granted strength, freedom, and clear understanding. May we learn to see God in our own hearts and in everyone around us. May God bless us all and fill our hearts with gratitude, grace, and love. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Peace, peace, peace be unto you.